All right, good morning everyone. I'm Craig McKinney, Director of International Affairs and Business Development, and it's a pleasure to welcome you here this morning from the Kentucky Cabinet for Economic Development. We've got a great program lined up for you today. You're going to get the chance to meet some of the Cabinet's international team, as well as gain some insight into some of the things that international companies are looking at when they're considering investments in the United States and Kentucky. Today's agenda will start off with a brief look at FDI in the United States, and then we're going to look at the tremendous success that Kentucky has had when it comes to FDI. We'll hear from our team members in Germany and Japan. Well, they'll give us some background into how they operate, as well as provide some perspective based on their experience in bringing international projects to the Commonwealth. We'll then transition and look at the exciting things going on with Kentucky's exports and the incredible STEP grant that's available through the Cabinet. It's a grant that 100% reimburses companies and is designed to help companies grow their sales by finding new markets overseas. So it's a great agenda. We've got ground to cover, not a minute to waste, so let's go ahead and kick things off. First, what is FDI? Simply put, a foreign direct investment, or FDI, is an investment made by a firm or individual in one country into business interests located in another country. But why is FDI important? We're going to look at three areas right now where FDI has tremendous impact, and that's in spurring innovation, driving exports, and creating jobs. We see here on the screen, $62 billion was spent on R&D in 2017 by U.S. affiliates of majority foreign-owned firms. When it comes to exports, over $382 billion worth of U.S. goods exported by majority foreign-owned firms, nearly a quarter of all U.S. exports in 2017. And next, something that's important to all of us, jobs. FDI supported 7.4 million American workers in 2017. 2.5 million of those positions were in the manufacturing sector, which we're going to see is of vital importance to states like Kentucky. So as we're seeing right now, and as we're going to see over the next few minutes, the economic impact that FDI has on a nation's economy is difficult to overstate, as it increases incomes, creates productivity gains, and brings new industries. Now, that tremendous success that Kentucky has had in FDI can be directly attributed to the fact that the United States is the #1 destination for FDI in the world. The chart that you see right now represents the years 2007 to 2017, and even taking into account the dip that we see, reflecting the Great Recession of 2008, FDI grew by 25% during this time period. Now, I'd like to give you a heads up on the next three slides that we're going to be looking at, because they really set the table for when we transition into Kentucky. So the next three slides are going to be FDI's impact on America's GDP, FDI's impact on jobs growth, and FDI's impact on the wages of those created jobs. Okay, so the next three slides, GDP, jobs, and wages. Our next slide, we again see a time period reflecting 2007 to 2017. And this time, if we pick up the chart at the dip in 2009, reflecting the recession of 2008, and we go from 2009 to 2017, this reflects a 41% increase of value-added impact that FDI had on America's GDP. When it comes to job growth, FDI employment rose 32%, while the overall private sector employment went up 7% during this same time period. And when it comes to wages, FDI means good paying jobs. U.S. workers at international companies earn 18% higher compensation than the economy-wide average. So we've talked about growth, we've talked about jobs, we've talked about wages. What has all this meant for Kentucky? Well, what it's meant is that Kentucky is truly center on a global stage. Over 500 companies in Kentucky have international roots. Projects from 32 countries have selected us as their destination. And that's meant the creation of over 112,000 jobs in the Commonwealth. Now, the graph that you see here at the bottom, it represents the top 10 countries in Kentucky as ranked by the number of facilities that they have in the state. And while I'm not going to read through each country individually, since we'll be hearing from our friends in Japan and Germany later on, I'd like to go ahead and point out that those two countries rank first and second on the list, with Japan having 197 facilities and Germany having 78. So how's this translated when it comes to numbers? Well, we see here, through a decade of FDI growth in Kentucky, that it's been 726 announced FDI projects. From international companies that's invested $15.6 billion into our state and have created over 38,000 jobs. 2020, year to date, even with the challenges of the year, I'm happy to say that we've been able to announce 13 FDI projects from international companies who are going to invest $362 million and create over 1,200 jobs. Now, this next slide shows some examples that I've pulled of some recent FDI projects that the Cabinet has run over the past couple of years. And we see here examples in Hebron, Ashland, Bowling Green, Auburn, Hazard, and Paducah. There's a couple of things that I'd like to point out about this slide. First is that while these examples are just a sliver of the FDI projects that we've run through the Cabinet in recent memory, these examples prove that from Paducah to Ashland, FDI projects can impact and do impact every corner of our state. The other thing that I'd like to point out about this slide is that while some of these examples are representative of first-time investments by international companies in Kentucky, over half this list is representative of international companies that we recruited here, and then they doubled down and reinvested in Kentucky by doing an expansion. And with that comes the importance of having a clear view of where success truly comes from. Now, while announcing elephant projects is really exciting, and they're home runs when they happen, the real success, folks, comes from base hits. Now, what do I mean by base hits? I mean that approximately 70% of the announcements that the Cabinet makes are from existing industry in the state that decide to do an expansion. Well, how does that happen? Well, to start, we have to recognize that the answer to why is Kentucky so successful in FDI is both multifactorial and long-term. I mean that when a company comes to Kentucky and that company is having a good experience, that experience resonates across their supply chains over time. And in turn, those companies think about coming here and investing themselves. I mean that when we recruit an international company to Kentucky, and that company is having a good experience, well, you can be certain that that experience is being transmitted in real time back to that company's HQ overseas. And then the C-suites there, they make the decision to reinvest in Kentucky and do an expansion. So while things like our strategic location, our low industrial electrical rates, our ranking at the top of the list when it comes to global logistics, ranking again at the top of the list when it comes to quality of life, all those factors are really important when it comes to our success. But just as important is the fact when an international company makes the commitment to invest in Kentucky, our state and the people in our communities reciprocate that commitment, and we give them the best experience possible. All right, so we've talked about success stories, we've talked about announcements and investments and jobs. Let's see how all this is added up and where Kentucky ranks nationally when it comes to FDI. We're going to start by a brief look at how we're doing regionally. We see here a map. We've got Kentucky at the center, surrounded by our border states. And we see that we lead the region when it comes to FDI jobs as a percentage of total private sector employment. And that our lead in the region is pretty substantial. So then the next question becomes, great, so where does Kentucky rank nationally? Well, I'm glad you asked, because it means that we rank at the top of the list. Kentucky has the highest concentration of FDI jobs, with 8.5% of Kentuckians in the private sector being employed by international companies. Companies from Japan support the most FDI jobs, followed by Germany and Canada, respectively. Now, I'd like to take a moment and point out how significant Toyota was and how all this played out. Their facility in Georgetown, about 30 minutes from my office, is the largest Toyota manufacturing facility in the world, and they employ over 8,000 workers. So now that we know where we rank when it comes to FDI jobs, let's see where all these jobs are going. This next slide will not come as a surprise to a lot of us, because many of you know that manufacturing represents 13% of the state's private sector employment. And given what we've seen over the past few minutes, I think we can all agree pretty quickly how important FDI projects were in contributing to the growth that we see in those two left columns. Now, before I turn the program over to my friend in Germany, I'd like to stay on manufacturing for just a second. We're working on a lot of things pretty hard at the cabinet, and we're talking about things all the time. The future of automotive, hunting opportunities as it relates to US companies onshoring their facilities back from overseas. And we also talk about advanced manufacturing. And with that, if you are a company in Kentucky or an economic developer in Kentucky, I'd like to encourage you to reach out and connect with Eric Woolridge at KCTCS, who recently gave a brilliant presentation at the cabinet on advanced manufacturing. Now, I'm just going to take a wild guess and say that you've probably seen a lot of webinars recently. I get it, me too. But Eric's presentation was the best that I've seen during this period, and it left a big impact on me. So if you're in Kentucky and you're taking notes, Eric Woolridge, KCTCS, and Advanced Manufacturing. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to some members of the Cabinet's International team. And we're going to start with Joshua Sieber, Director of our European Representative Office in Hamburg, Germany. Joshua's been doing an outstanding job since joining us in January. Joshua, thank you for joining us, and I'll turn the program over to you.
Thank you very much, Craig, and guten Tag from Hamburg, Germany. This is Joshua Sieber. I'm the Director of the European Representative Office here in Hamburg. As Craig mentioned, I started in this role in January. Before this, I spent nearly a decade serving in various roles with the German-American Chamber of Commerce in Colorado and Chicago. So the European Representative Office is responsible for attracting FDI from all over Europe to Kentucky. And we typically achieve this by networking with companies at trade shows, speaking at United States Commercial Service and select USA events, attending Chamber of Commerce events like the German IHK, that's the German National Chamber Network. If you look over to the right, you see a small star representing our office in Northern Germany, and all of those points are trade shows and events that we've attended and spoken at over the last few years. So we really get all over the place. Finally, we maintain good relationships with our network of contacts, usually in the form of consultants, existing investors, and other partners. For example, Gray Construction out of Lexington is a huge advocate of ours. Shout out to Vanna Biermann. We also enjoy a visible profile as a member of CASE. CASE is the Council of American States in Europe. This is an older organization. They're celebrating 50 years of existence. They're actually currently in the process of incorporating, and it's made up of 15 US states with representative offices in Europe, just like ours. So our office opened in 2011 and has also co-hosted some top-level delegations from Kentucky. So taking a closer look at the European business presence in Kentucky, Craig mentioned we have over 500 international companies operating in Kentucky. A little over 200 of those are hailing from Europe. And as you can see, nearly half are coming from the German-speaking countries of Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. Now, this has largely been attributed to Kentucky's and Germany's common strengths in the automotive sector, of course. After that is followed by the UK and France, while everyone comes in at just under 10%. So by industry, as mentioned, traditionally big automotive component, of course, which you can see here with 14% of European companies involved in that sector, followed by 12% in distribution logistics, largely attributed to DHL's presence at CVG, along with, I'm going to say, mostly German freight forwarding companies in terms of European freight forwarding logistics companies. And then rounding off that top four are chemicals and plastics and rubber. And of course, among those plastics and rubber companies, there could very well be several supporting the auto industry as well as other industries in there. So at the bottom, these are industries that we've kind of zeroed in on this year. You know, we've seen more potential with these faring better in the current situation in terms of weathering the storm and recovering faster. So, you know, food and beverage, logically, you know, the second one here, lightweighting, we still wanted to maintain that thread with the auto industry, of course, and recognize the advances being made in e-vehicle and lightweighting technology. So we targeted that. Medical device, another clear choice. And most recently, we put a very heavy emphasis on agritech. Of course, this is prompted primarily by the collaboration agreement with Dutch companies. In fact, you may have seen a video that we produced as a result of our visit to The Hague last month when we met with key players involved in that collaboration agreement. And the link to that video will now be posted in the chat function of this webinar. And if you miss it, you can check it out in its entirety on the Team Kentucky YouTube channel. So when we go out to meet companies and stakeholders like the ones in the Netherlands, it's important to understand some of the more esoteric nuances of dealing with European business people. You know, what are they after? What makes them different from dealing with US companies? And for example, I mean, what is important to a European company when they're looking at having a presence in the US? Well, first of all, it's important to note that, I mean, have no doubt, Kentucky is competitive with its neighboring states. We're small, but we're scrappy, and we can hold our own when it comes to offering incentives, assisting with market entry, dealing with site selection. In fact, I've personally received, you know, over my brief time here, numerous points of feedback from potential and existing European investors on how both the European office here in Hamburg and the team in Frankfurt have really gone above and beyond in working to settle companies in Kentucky. So very proud to represent the Commonwealth. So speaking of site selection, this list here is basically ranked in order of importance. At the top of the list is sites and buildings. Much depends on having existing buildings, brownfields, spec buildings, or at least, you know, shovel-ready sites available, whether a company is looking to move in promptly or seeking out a lease to buy situation. It's always good to have several options available, and Kentucky was able to land some bigger projects like the German companies Evis and Dr. Schneider, because the buildings that suited their needs at the time were available. After that is labor availability and labor cost. You know, especially pre-COVID, when skilled labor was difficult to come by, it was absolutely critical that a foreign company have access to that skilled labor. And in acknowledging this need, Kentucky put a lot into its KY Fame program and other skill-up programs to accommodate not only current investor expansion, but also new plants. So the third point here I'll go into more detail shortly is building long-term relationships, so more on that later. But finally, it's very important to state that a state is business friendly and can, in the end, offer a healthy incentive package to entice new investors. So dealing with the state at the state level is really only kind of the first layer of the onion, because a new company will ultimately be dealing at the microcosmic level with local economic development representatives, or EDs, as we call them. Although there's a lot of overlap in the important points that I just mentioned above, you know, getting into greater detail on sites in the form of negotiating land prices, for example, and then you know, discussing local labor force situations, and then an additional layer of incentives on top of what the state has to offer. A couple of things worth pointing out here are: one, any assistance that may be offered by the local EDs, for example, in the form of relocation assistance. And playing into that aspect of helping with the relocation, it could simply really come down to how welcome and, you know, at home a general manager of a company feels in the community, keep in mind, this might be a European from the home office who is bringing his or her family over, putting the kids in school and establishing themselves in the community for several years. So they want to make sure it's a good fit there. So these are some of the things that drive a European company to narrow down their search. So you've got them at the table and you're negotiating. What are some things to keep in mind regarding business cultural differences? So this is where things can easily get country specific. I mean, Europe is made up of more than a couple dozen different countries. So at the risk of overgeneralizing an entire continent, let's just suffice to say that these won't apply to every country. And honestly, these tend to lean heavily towards German idiosyncrasies because we deal largely with German companies and we're located in Germany. Number one, though, is that work and personal life tend to be strictly divided. It's kind of a work hard, play hard mentality. There are more paid vacation days. Those days are typically spent in a very family-oriented fashion, and they're taken in line with school holiday schedules. We're just coming off of a 2-week fall holiday schedule where people took advantage of that to go on vacation, family vacations, their kids are out of school. Then there are also the famously generous maternity and in some cases paternity leave policies. You'll also see strict overtime policies. Next, European business people tend to keep things pretty serious and to the point in their business dealings. So the next time you're at a table or on a Zoom call with some Germans and are wanting to drop that dad joke as an icebreaker, definitely think twice. The next thing of note is what I'm going to call here the Netflix effect. And this refers to the just absolute fire hose of American culture in the form of movies, TV, and music that Europe and indeed the world are exposed to, right? I mean, there's always been a great level of exported US culture, but media before the internet was much more limited. For example, in Germany, 2 of the biggest shows on television in the 80s and 90s were Dallas and Married with Children. So now with the ubiquitousness of the internet and streaming services, there's really a much greater access to more nuanced and diverse media. How-to videos in YouTube, endless blogs and forums and articles on any topic on American business culture and otherwise that a European would like to look up. So important to point out here now is that this is still very much a one-way street. Americans are still relatively limited in the amount of media coming in from Europe, largely attributed to lack of translated material and whatnot. So Europeans have a greater advantage with their information sources when educating themselves on and forming opinions about what it would or could be like to deal with Americans on various levels. So why is this important? Well, this is just for your consideration, especially if you're working at the state or local capacity, that Europeans by nature are used to doing business in an international setting. They have a better sense of cross-cultural differences. So the onus is really on you to take the time to do a little research into the country and culture with which you may be dealing. So finally, I want to circle back to this desire by Europeans to form long-term relationships. What does this mean? Well, on the one hand, it's important to know that many European businesses, and this is an integral part of especially German business culture, are family owned and may go back generations. It's very common, for example, to find such companies well outside of urban centers and even really in the middle of nowhere, where they're well established in the community. And in fact, it's often the case that you'll see multiple generations of inhabitants of these little towns working in these plants. And this harkens back to kind of the pastoral American idea of my daddy and my daddy's daddy worked at that plant, so I'm going to work at that plant. But you don't see that so much in the US these days. But Europeans certainly bring this notion with them to especially these smaller rural communities when establishing themselves in the US. Really pretty much to the point where they're basically building this into their workforce and business development strategy. So as you can imagine, a mentality like this one is one that craves stability. And Europeans certainly want that. They want stability in their community, with their workforce, and dealing with their partners at the state and local level. So I hope you were able to glean something out of this. I just wanted to, kind of break out of the numbers and figures and give you something a little more that you can work with when dealing directly with Europeans. So that's my time. I thank you very much. And I'm turning it back over to Craig to introduce my colleague in Tokyo. Thank you.
Thank you, Joshua. We really appreciated that. Next up, I'd like to introduce you to Mike Takahashi, Executive Director of our Asia office in Tokyo, Japan. Mike's been with the Cabinet since 2015. And before we turn it over to Mike, I'd like to point out the significance of that continued partnership between Japan and Kentucky, as even with the challenges of this year, we've announced 6 FDI projects from Japan that will mean over $180 million in investments and mean also the creation of over 460 jobs. So Mike, thank you for joining us, and we especially want to thank you because we know it's getting pretty late in Tokyo right now. So thank you, and I'll turn the microphone over to you.
Thank you, Craig. Good morning, everyone. This is Mike Takahashi of Japan office. To start my presentation, let me introduce myself. My relationship with Kentucky started in 1985. It was 35 years ago. I worked for the Japanese trade and investment company, Itochu Corporation, for more than 40 years and worked in the United States for 17 years. I belonged to Steel Division and worked in New York office for 8 years from 1984. From 1985, Japanese auto parts manufacturer Topi and Akebono started the project in Kentucky. We Itochu built the Steel Service Center in Winchester, Kentucky to supply steel to them. I was involved in these projects. From year 2000, I worked in Cincinnati office for 6 years and then 3 years in Chicago office. During this period, I frequently visited Kentucky to visit customers and manage subsidiary companies in Kentucky. I'd like to touch the history of Japanese investment in Kentucky. In 1974, Mazak started operation in Florence, Kentucky as the first Japanese manufacturing company. In 1985, Topi Corporation built the plant in Frankfort to supply wheels to Honda in Ohio and Nissan in Tennessee. Honda started to produce first Accord at Ohio plant in 1982. Nissan started production at the Tennessee plant in 1983. Topi and other Japanese auto parts companies built plants in Kentucky during this period. Kentucky was a good location to do business with both of Honda and Nissan. Topi has just completed and announced $38 million additional investment for expansion and improvement of their facility. In 1988, that relationship significantly became strong when Toyota Motor Manufacturing selected Georgetown, Kentucky for their first manufacturing plant in US. Now that facility is the world's largest plant of Toyota among all Toyota plants, including Japan. Now we have about 200 Japanese facilities in Kentucky. These facilities employ 46,700 people. Kentucky is ranked number 5 with the number of employees at Japanese companies. Considering the population of each state, number 5 position is significant. Here you see the logos of major Japanese companies who employ many people in Kentucky. I'd like to introduce organizations we work with in Japan to bring investment to Kentucky. The first one is US Embassy in Tokyo. The next one is Keidanren. Keidanren is Japan Business Federation. They have 1,444 major companies, 109 industries organizations, and 47 local economic organizations as the members. The delegation of this Keidanren visited Kentucky in 2017, it was 3 years ago, to enhance relationship with us. The next one is JETRO. JETRO is the acronym of Japan External Trade Organization. It is a Japanese government organization, and they support investment and the trade of Japanese companies. The last one is ASOA, ASOA, is American State Office Association. 21 US states have office in Japan and formed this association. We sometimes compete each other, but we work together with US Embassy to promote direct investment to the United States. Also, I'd like to introduce JASK, Japan America Society of Kentucky. JASK was established in 1987. This is a nonprofit membership organization to promote better understanding of business, culture, and the customs of Japan and Kentucky. JASK office is located in Frankfurt. They provide events and services to the members. These photos are from New Year's party of this year at the governor's mansion. The membership is open to everyone. Now I'd like to explain some characteristics of Japanese business culture. I have picked the 3 things. The first one is a difference in decision-making in business. We see more bottom-up process rather than top-down process in Japan. The second one is lifetime employment system. Japanese companies try not to lay off, even in difficult situation. It creates trust and loyalty of employees to the company. The third one is close relationship between the management people and employees. Lifetime employment system create the atmosphere of family. There are some important factors for Japanese companies when they look for the new facilities in the United States. In addition to the basic things such as cost of manufacturing, labor force availability, etc. The first one is the location and the close proximity to their customers and suppliers. The next one is friendly community and long-term relationship. Most of Japanese people who have experience of working and living in Kentucky likes Kentucky very much. They appreciate for kind hospitality and friendship of the people in Kentucky. To close my presentation, I have good news for you. Kentucky Fried Chicken Japan celebrates 50th anniversary this year. They opened the first restaurant in Nagoya city of Aichi Prefecture 50 years ago. Suntory sells more and more Maker's Mark and Jim Beam in Japan. Japanese like Kentucky Fried Chicken and Kentucky Bourbon, and Japanese love Kentucky, and I love Kentucky. Thank you for your time. And now let me return the microphone to Craig. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. And again, we appreciate the late hour that you're pulling this evening. So thanks again, and we appreciate your insight. And folks, now we're going to transition the program, and we're going to go to another area where Kentucky has found a lot of success, and that's in the export of our goods across the globe. So why do companies go global? Well, we all know it's to increase sales, but what's a little bit behind that? To start, it's because new markets means more consumers. The simple math is just that the customer base outside a firm's home market is always significantly greater than that of its domestic market. It's also because a diversified customer base protects businesses from changing conditions in their domestic market and gives companies the opportunity to take advantage of market conditions in other countries. And then also finding new markets for your product can also greatly extend the life cycle of its sales. A great example is that Volkswagen continued to sell the original VW Beetle in Latin America for years after the last one was produced in the US. So why are exports important? Well, if you're talking to an economic developer, jobs are going to be at the top of that list. As we know that exports can lead to creating new jobs and the retention of current jobs. In addition, export jobs have traditionally been tied to manufacturing, which we saw a few minutes ago is one of our state's most vital sectors. Now, I love this next slide. We see here the growth of Kentucky's exports around the world from 2009 to 2019. This chart represents a 46% increase during this time period to the tune of about $15 billion. Now, what did we ship in 2019 and where was it going? Well, our slide here, it shows the top 10 exports for 2019. And starting the list is aerospace products, followed by motor vehicles, pharmaceuticals, auto parts, navigational, measuring, electromedical, and control instruments, resins, rubbers, fibers, and filaments, chemicals, computer equipment, communications equipment, and then rounding out the top 10 list is one of our favorite exports, distilled spirits, which all of us around here, we know that that's code speak for Kentucky bourbon. All in all, when you total all of our exports for 2019, it meant 32.9 billion of Kentucky goods shipping out overseas. Now, where was it going? We see here the top 10 destinations for our exports last year. And again, while I'm not going to read through each country individually, it's important that we pause and take note of our friends to the north in Canada, who represented 23.5% of Kentucky's 2019 exports to the tune of $7.8 billion. Now, you guys know where I'm going with this. Where does Kentucky rank nationally? Well, it means that we're a top 20 exporter in the US, coming in at number 16. That $32.9 billion that I mentioned, that represented 4% growth in 2019, and that was significant for two reasons. One, it was another new record for Kentucky exports. But secondly, we grew 4% during a year when the national average decreased 1.4%. So what's going to be the key to sustaining this success? Well, I can tell you that one of the keys is going to be the Kentucky Export Initiative, or KEI. The KEI is a consortium of Kentucky's economic development partners designed to help small and mid-sized manufacturers increase sales and find new customers internationally. And the crux of the KEI is to help Kentucky manufacturers achieve success by connecting them with the resources that already exist in the state. So if you're a company in Kentucky, or if you're an economic developer in Kentucky, and you have a manufacturer in your region that isn't exporting, connect them with us. Why? because the KEI has all the tools to help them grow their company. Because if that company comes to us and we find out that they're not yet ready to export, we've got Miss Christina Joyce and Miss Tony Sears at the Kentucky Small Business Development Center who will get that company ready for free. And once that company is ready, or if they're ready now, they can take advantage of the STEP grant that we're about to hear about, and they connect with Sherry Mulkins and Ian Moores at the World Trade Center for trade education services and get 100% reimbursed. Then after that, we've got Peggy Polly, Sarah Marino, Mona Musa, and Brian Miller at the U.S. Commercial Service in Kentucky, who will not only help you research target markets for your product, but they're going to connect you with international buyers, and you can get 100% reimbursed again. So guys, the table is set for our companies to increase sales and grow jobs. We can take you there from start to finish. But what has to happen to make it a success is a team effort. It's constant, continuous communication with the KEI partners, economic development organizations, and CED's offices here in Frankfurt, Germany, and Japan. We've got to reach out and promote this initiative across the state in order to reach our goals. In addition to the KEI, take advantage of the resources that you have here with the cabinet, with myself, Mike, Joshua, and Gil. Last year, we exported $940 million worth of goods to Japan and $11 billion to Europe. Where I'm going with that is that the infrastructure already exists. Let's just tap into the resources that I've mentioned, grow some sales, and create some jobs. And of course, a cornerstone of the KEI is the STEP grant. And with that, I'd like to introduce Gil Finley, director of our STEP program. Gil's been doing a great job since joining us last November. Gil, it's terrific to have you here with me, and I'll turn the program over to you.
Thanks, Craig. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Hope everyone has been remaining safe and healthy during these times. Again, my name is Gil Finley, and I'm the director of the STEP program. And the STEP program stands for the State Trade Expansion Program. The first thing I would like to talk about today is what exactly is STEP? The STEP program, the State Trade Expansion Program, is a federally funded grant administered by the Kentucky Cabinet for Economic Development. This program is for specifically small businesses inside of the state of Kentucky who are new to exporting or looking to expand their current exporting efforts. Now, the grant is offered to these companies on the basis of a $10,000 reward based on grant funding availability that can be utilized for a variety of different things. To this point, in the past two grant cycles, we have helped 112 companies and have reimbursed approximately $457,000. So who qualifies for the STEP program? Again, we want to stress this. We are all about Team Kentucky. So this STEP program is for specifically small businesses inside the state of Kentucky who are new to exporting or looking to expand their current exporting efforts. The company must qualify to be a small business defined by the SBA. The company must also export products that are at least 51%. And if there's any company that would be interested in the STEP program, they can contact us or to apply at the kyexports.com website. Now, how do we use the STEP program, right? That's the biggest question. Travel expenses are one of the main things that the STEP grant covers. So I want to be able to bring to your attention that, however, the travel reimbursement requests are for one person and requires companies to submit a pre-approval form before being eligible for reimbursement. Additionally, the STEP grant, again, covers a wide variety of different expenditures. Here we see our list of things that are not necessarily dealing with travel, but more so business improvement. Recently, the SBA increased the expenditure cap for these services listed here so that our companies would be able to have more leverage and flexibility to be able to improve their businesses. Lastly, but not least, one of the unique services that the STEP participants can utilize is our funding through our partners at the U.S. Commercial Services and the Kentucky World Trade Center. However, I would like to point out one specific service that I think is the key to a great success in exporting, and that is the Gold Key service. The Gold Key service provides U.S. firms traveling to a foreign market with up to 5 pre-screened appointments to establish relationships with potential overseas agents, distributors, sales representatives, business partners, and other local entities inside those countries. Now, there are so many different great companies that we help and have assisted over the years, but I would like to point out to you our current, what we call our Kentucky STEP AllStars. Now, you may or may not be familiar with one of these, but for my ice cream lovers out there, when I took over the program, to my surprise, Dippin' Dots is one of our Kentucky STEP AllStars right here in Paducah, Kentucky. Dippin' Dots uses the STEP program for foreign market sales trips with international partners, whether it be current partners or potential. Another esteemed company, a part of our grant program, is Ski Scooties. They're famously known for their involvement in the Winter Olympics. The STEP program offers, again, a lot of different variety of services to a great amount of businesses within the state of Kentucky. We look forward to continuing great success within the STEP program within the state of Kentucky. Go Team Kentucky. Thank you for your time.
And folks, to reiterate what Gil said, this is a $10,000 reimbursable grant that goes in yearly cycles. Right now we have 2 years open, and companies can apply for consecutive years. So if you connect the dots, that's $20,000 of a reimbursable grant that's currently available to Kentucky companies to help them get a head start in their exports. So I'm getting so excited talking about it that I want to come back to my desk after lunch and just start making something so I can take advantage of this myself. With that, this wraps up today's webinar. We hope that you found today's content to be informative, insightful, and hopefully a little inspiring. But we thank you for your time. We really appreciate you joining us. And with that, we'll kick off any Q&A that you might have.
All right, everyone. Thank you all for everyone who's participated in the chat. We did receive several questions here. The first question is from Scott Cogg. He asks, how do Kentucky manufacturers identify themselves as companies looking to support foreign companies starting up in the U.S.?
Could you repeat that, Christopher? How do Kentucky companies identify themselves?
Yeah, how do Kentucky manufacturers identify themselves as companies looking to support foreign companies starting up in the U.S.?
How do they identify themselves looking to support foreign companies starting in the U.S.? Well, that's easy. One of the biggest ways that you can do it is connect with us at the cabinet. We've got no shortage of companies overseas looking to create either sales channels or, more importantly, looking for M&A opportunities and find partners here stateside and in Kentucky. So really, the most direct way would be to connect with us outside of this chat, and we'll be happy to help you.
Great. And the next question's for Joshua's portion. Could you give an example of a strict overtime policy? Does that mean little or no overtime?
The good question. No, even though a lot of employees are salaried, it's not understood like it typically is in the United States that a person's just kind of expected to stay over for that extra hour or put in some overtime. Those overtime hours are logged and then can be converted into time off in the future. So it's not that overtime is necessarily restricted. That can also happen in some companies where a company can strictly forbid overtime. But it's that the time is documented and then can be converted into time off later.
Great. And then the last question we had here is, would you be willing to do this presentation for chambers and other groups and economic development organizations again in the future?
Absolutely. Our job here is to serve the 120 counties of the Commonwealth by helping bring FDI to the states and promote exports. And I love connecting with the people in our communities. I love helping them if I can. And I love learning about what's going on. So anytime you want us to come out and give this presentation, whether it's virtually during this current period or in person once things settle down, I'll be happy to. And just connect with me and I'll be there.
Great. And actually, Craig, we just got another question from Mark Welch. He asked, are foreign companies more attracted to communities with existing firms from the same nation or business sector?
That's a great question. You know, there is not a all-encompassing answer for that. However, it's yes and no, and it's yes in that, say with Japanese companies is a perfect example, right? We have a huge Japanese presence in our state. And certainly when we're talking about tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers, right, to OEMs, they're trying to get closer to their customer. So while yes, there is a certain component to that, it's not always the be-all and end-all factor, right? There are other things like workforce, strategic location, logistics, industrial rates, quality of life. So like I said earlier, it's multifactorial, right? There's multiple factors. Great question.
That's all we have.
All right. So if that's all, we really appreciate you joining us today. Please don't hesitate to connect with any of the 4 individuals that you heard from this morning. And with that, we'll sign off and wish you well. Thank you.